century, lots of arsenic was being used in the environment from things like agriculture and being released through gold mining processes. At the same time, we saw all these declines in what were really rare, or now really rare, marsupial species, like the thylacine and eastern quoll, and basically asked us, could arsenic have been a threatening process alongside things like habitat loss, disease, fire regimes?
We essentially looked at hair samples of wildlife. So this was road-killed paddy melons in Tasmania, which is small little marsupials, eastern barred bandicoots, kangaroos, wombats. Took hair samples. We took a corresponding soil sample to see if there was arsenic in the hair.
I was looking at the analytical side of the project primarily, and that basically involved getting our samples. We then had to dissolve them up in acid, quite strong acid, and then we put them into a machine called an ICP-MS. But we mainly found that there was arsenic in a lot of the animals' hairs, and at levels that if you saw that in humans, that would tell you that they could be getting chronic arsenic poisoning, which was quite interesting because that hadn't really been found before, because no one had done studies on wildlife before. We also found that mining seemed to be quite a large source of the arsenic, because when we looked in close proximity to a mine, the levels were much higher and they started to decline as you got further away from the mine, so that was also a key finding.
Eastern barred bandicoots had a lot more arsenic than we expected. So we sampled eastern barred bandicoots that were from captivity or were from areas that should be quite free of arsenic. And we found that they had arsenic concentration in their hair that was so much higher than a lot of the other animals. So that kind of is an interesting finding, considering eastern barred bandicoots are an endangered species.
I looked into a species of grass known as Lagrostis capillaris. It's brown-top bent grass. It's an introduced species to most of Australia, and it came from Europe, and it's able to basically hyperaccumulate arsenic. So it actively draws it in, and the challenge with that is if there's these grasses or other species out there, other plants, that are accumulating arsenic in their shoot tissues, they're really high concentrations, little paddy melon comes along, tries to eat it, you might be getting arsenic that way.
There's just a lot of things to explore still in this whole area of research. So we've kind of opened the Pandora's box of arsenic as a potential threat, I suppose.
These fungal infections, the average person breathes them in every day, but for immunocompromised people, they actually kind of take hold in your lungs and they're really hard to detect.
We worked with people that have blood cancers, for instance leukemia, or a bone marrow transplant. The artificial intelligence takes someone's CT scan and it looks at it, and then it looks at the doctor's actual notes that they've written on the CT scan, and then it spits out a probability of the person having a fungal infection.
It can take a patient record and take certain aspects out of it, like a microbiological flag. So it might say, okay, this person has had a culture and it's been tested positive for fungus. And it can take that and pharmaceutical data, what drugs you've been given, and a whole bunch of other information about the patient, and it can condense these together to provide a score or kind of like a threshold which determines whether or not this person is likely to have an invasive mold disease. Because what normally happens is individuals, clinicians aren't particularly sure which patient has what at what time.
These antifungal drugs interact directly with cancer drugs, so it means that people's therapy for cancer is poorly affected by antifungals. So they do really need to know where it's going and how it's affecting these people's bodies.
AI has huge potential, and I think a lot of people are worried about AI taking jobs and all of that, but I think that we need to view it as more of an enabler. So for example, this particular technology, like the first thought is, well, if it's reading the CT scans, then we don't need radiologists. But in reality, we're actually using it more to flag them, and then this radiologist kind of has a better idea of what they're looking for. So I would say it's more about improving accuracy than getting rid of jobs and things like that. And I think that's applicable to a lot of different areas.
When we first started, we thought, let's get all young people out of residential aged care facilities, and then as we researched it more, we realised that's not a realistic aim, nor is that
the right answer. It's about improving the quality of care for them.
I got together expert panels from a variety of disciplines like rehab medicine, ABI specialists, so acquired brain injury specialists, injury prevention specialists, and we discussed the issues of young people and the injuries they might be more prone to.
I was doing research on geographical mapping, so accessing the National Health Database and trying to put together some novel maps to explore the population distribution. The numbers of young people in aged care in regional Victoria have been increasing over the last decade, whereas nationally there's been a trend of decreasing. Seeing the complete opposite pattern in Victoria was a little bit concerning and surprising to me, and also to experts that we shared these findings with.
And we just really wanted to go up to Canberra and discuss the latest research in this field and really get this back on the minds of politicians. And coincidentally, about a month later, they announced the Royal Commission into Aged Care, which actually has a very specific term about young people. So they're actually going to really focus on that in this Royal Commission, which is something that's been missing in the past.
The way we needed to capture eye shine from animals was using something called a spectrometer. It's a probe, a light probe that shoots out light into the animal's eyes, and then that reflected light is pointed back into a probe and into a fiber optic cable that goes into essentially a linear set of CCD cameras.
The main parts of what I was working on was building a machine learning model that could classify the different species that we were detecting, and use it as sort of find out ways to classify these signals to the species level so that we could understand what species we were looking at and develop a machine learning algorithm that could differentiate those. With the team, we were working very closely together in different aspects of the project as well, so it was very much fingers in a lot of different pies.
So I was looking into the different spectrums for different species and seeing how distinct they were. And in the second semester, my role was predominantly working with image processing software, so writing computer vision functions that were able to take an image that was taken of eye shine and then locate the eye shine signals in that image and extract information from that. And so the information that we would extract, the colour of the eye shine, could then be used as a feature for machine learning classification.
We decided to do it off of model eyes, actually, because of the logistical difficulties with working with real animals, because it's really difficult to get an animal to stand still and take data from them. And so we kind of worked with these model reflectors that we used to kind of model a real eye. And then after that, we also worked with some dead eyes that we got from real animals.
We ended up doing some of our testing in stormwater drains under the city because they provided a dark environment with a long enough range for us to do our tests.
There were so many different problems that we encountered, like deterioration of the tissue, which means that the signal's very much dimmer. Things like, trying to preserve them all equally in dry ice, and then they wouldn't thaw properly, and you had to get the whole kind of freezing and thawing thing correct so that you'd be able to faithfully replicate a live animal's eye, because we were using dead eyes, and we found that process really difficult to get right.
This technology could be developed for a wide range of different species in many different geographical areas. And so for any animals that do display eye shine, particularly predator species, I think there's a huge opportunity for this technology to help eradicating pest species.
What makes our technology different isn't the fact that we're using this really cool sci-fi technique to scan animals' eyes at the distance. No. What makes our technology a little bit better than what's currently out there is the fact that we're taking the tools that exist today in other industries, other fields, stuff from Silicon Valley, and we're just putting that into a really outdated, really, archaic system. And we're essentially bringing new tools in to wildlife and ecology.
We were looking at addressing sustainability in the animal feed at the zoo. And so it's kind of built out of this idea that zoos' mission is conservation and their primary effort is to end extinction. And yet if their practices aren't sustainable, then that's actually detracting from their key mission. And one of the areas that hasn't quite made a transition to sustainability is their animal feed at the zoo. And so we're looking at ways that we could improve that.
An elephant might eat about 100 to 300 kilos of food a day. So they're going through a lot of different foods. I think an otter who might weigh around 15 kilos will eat about 10 kilos of food a day. A lot of the people we spoke to were zoo nutritionists, and they have a very busy job in determining the diets of every single animal at the zoo. Now, a zoo might have about 1,000 different animals, and each animal might have their own needs and their own requirements. So you can imagine that developing a diet that's appropriate and suitable for every single animal in the zoo is quite a quest.
You can't feed a koala anything that's not a eucalyptus leaf. So as much as you want to make their diet as sustainable as possible, if you have to ship that eucalyptus in, it's what you have to do in order to keep koalas. So something that San Diego does, which is really cool, is they grow all of their eucalyptus on site. They manage to still satisfy that the need for the exotic diet, but also keep that carbon footprint relatively low. I looked specifically at the list of sustainable operating procedures that businesses can employ, so suppliers can use them in their operation, and that kind of makes them a little bit more sustainable. And then the checklist lets zoos evaluate the sustainability of their suppliers through qualification, I guess, rather than quantification.
So what my research involved was surveying primarily farmers and some other organisations, a lot of councils in Sydney, and looking at what byproducts they produce. So otherwise unused or waste material from agriculture or from other processes that are plant-based, and looking if we can use those to substitute some of the feed at zoos.
We've been working with World Vision, and there's a particular farming technique called farmer-managed natural regeneration that they believe in and they've been promoting for many, many years now. But the question was, how can we understand what's the right social and cultural environment for people to uptake FMNR?
So our project was not focusing on the science, because we know the science is there for the practice being sustainable and effective. We were focusing on the communication and the social structures and partnerships required to provide an enabling environment for that practice to be taken up by communities and also to be scaled up across the entire nation.
So we went over to Timor in the first half of the year and did a bunch of interviews in rural areas with communities, which tended to act as more of a focus group, because the tradition there was that the whole community would often come and it would almost be a bit of a ceremony and people would sit and listen, and it was really nice. It was like a really beautiful environment.
So in that September 2nd trip, we went back across and ran a workshop with the key stakeholders of government, NGOs, communities, and brought them all under one roof. And they made a commitment themselves to re-establishing a working group on farmer-managed natural regeneration.
The challenges they're facing are livelihoods challenges, and they're often caused by having low production yields from their crops or environmental degradation of the landscape they're working in to produce food. So that has an effect on both producing food to feed themselves and also for generating income, whether that be through markets selling the food they require to have any sort of income source at all. So this project focused on the new practice in order to help bolster the natural ecosystem.
They're making a substantial living each day off a single type of food, let alone what they cumulatively make as a community. So I think there's certainly benefit of the practice.
They all said, we're going to come together and build an alliance for this thing, and we're going to keep pushing this into the future. And the government's dedicated 5 hectares of land, which can be owned by that alliance. So it's really cool because there is progress. All of those stakeholders are meeting again in December to take it to the next level. And then we're hoping that World Vision will, adopt our recommendations, and that'll become their strategy for probably the next 5 years in Timor.
I was about 10 in 2006 when the Millennium Drought hit, and we essentially watched our paddocks blow away. And there's not much you can do about that, but also now you know what the cost of that wind erosion was. It's sort of concerning, and it makes it feel, it lets me understand why the science communication needs to be improved, because I mean, I was someone living it on the ground and we didn't understand that consequence.
Our project was looking at sustainable soils in New South Wales, and we were looking at a way to improve science communication from the research station out of DPI out to next user stakeholders, so people who talk to farmers.
The kind of practices that we're looking at for soil management are things like soil testing. Testing for certain nutrient levels and then balancing that when things aren't right. Really big one is the use of rotational grazing of livestock so they don't eat down all the grass. And also things like big landscape changes, like you can use raised beds to prevent waterlogging of crops, and you can put in streams and dams to make sure water moves quickly and efficiently around the farm.
Farmers still need the latest information. They're still running amazing businesses. They need the science from somewhere. So they've branched out and have started paying fee-for-service advisors. So I was looking at how the soils unit could get their information to the advisors so that the farmers could still have really good high-quality soils information.
That whole process of building something from complete scratch I found that really enjoyable, especially when we got the feedback coming through like, oh, wow, this would just be so useful for us. Like, I can't believe we haven't done this before. And yeah, that was really rewarding to say like, okay, yeah, we've done something here, we've really made a difference.
Seeing all these different people going out and trying things and trying to understand and trying to solve, it's kind of created a much deeper passion.
It definitely just opened my eyes to all the possibilities and given me the confidence to actually pursue those possibilities.
And now, being on these internships, and I've studied overseas, and I've worked across a variety of different companies now, and created something for the New South Wales government, which I never thought I'd be able to do.
Global Challenges just gives you a really nice insight, I think, into how that global system looks, and says, here's all the different, points at which you could try to pull a lever and potentially change something. We're not going to change the whole world overnight, but maybe there's something small that we can contribute to.
To do something in the intersection of entrepreneurship and nutrition would be the dream, and in particular in some sort of development context. I really love Southeast Asia, and in particular Indonesia, and to work in that place for a while and within that culture and community would be fantastic.
Really want to work on food security and looking at how we can best feed the world without damaging rural and regional communities who are doing it pretty tough, but also without damaging the environment as well, and try to find that sort of middle of the triangle, like ensuring that there's healthy people, healthy environment, and everyone has enough food to eat.
Make something that people care about, that I care about a lot, that's solving other people's problems, and that's something I want to do for the rest of my life. And this project's just given me a chance to just do that. Something so meaningful, and something that actually solves a global challenge. That's why I really enjoyed this project, and I want to keep doing stuff like this, making things that are actually meaningful.